It's, what, a mil over Nighthawk? Hi, before I get into my usual shtick of explosions and big numbers and all that in these types of videos, I just want to mention one thing real quick. I am taking part in the Game to Give charity fundraiser this year that Bungie does every year, and while I'm unfortunately not a feature creator this year, I am still trying to do my part and raise funds. I have some nice emblems up for grabs, some incentives in there as well, so if you like nice emblems and you care about that, hey, you can donate to charity, or if you don't and you just want to help for a good cause, you can do that as well. But either way, I just wanted to mention that. Thanks for anybody that has already supported, or if you will in the future. The links for those will be in the description and or the pinned comment below if you want to check that out. But in the meantime, let's get back to the video. They say it's better late than never. Episode 2 is wrapping up in a few weeks into Heresy, but before that, I do want to share this monster of a DPS build for Warlocks. I'm certainly late to the party, but who knows? There could be people out there that don't know about this and might even use it for some last-minute raids or dungeons or even flawless runs where you can turn a 4-phase into a 2-phase or a 2-phase into a 1-phase maybe. So let's get into it. For this build, we are utilizing the ridiculous power of Sanguine Alchemy, the exotic chess piece for Warlocks. At this point, Sanguine is one of the most powerful exotics in the game and one of the best overall at pumping out damage against bosses. For those of you that are out of the loop, Bungie has reworked Sanguine a few times now recently, and currently as it stands, it does the following things. Number 1, it provides a 4x weapon surge to the user based on the element of their super for a massive 30 seconds. In simple terms, it gives you a 25% damage buff instead of your usual surges that you get in your boots, which can now be swapped out to a different surge element or different mods entirely. Note that the exotic only cares what your current super is and not what it was 5 seconds ago. This plays a big part. And number 2, Sanguine also has the ability to mark any target that you are damaging as long as you are in a rift of any kind. This includes your standard healing or empowering rift and Well of Radiance too. When a target is marked through this, you deal extra damage to said target, on top of also getting that 4x surge that I just mentioned previously. Both of these perks help you skyrocket your damage against any boss, and the best part is, a damage super is not even required. As you'll be seeing on screen throughout the video, you can still play the role of support with Well of Radiance, but you'll be able to turn that into an offensive machine for your own benefit. Thanks to how Sanguine works, we are able to use Well of Radiance, pop it for our team for protection and a damage buff, then swap to any other flavor of Warlock that we want. For this particular build, we'll be using Prismatic Arc Warlock to match for our weapons. Small note here, if you do not have Prismatic Arc Warlock unlocked for your Warlock, then you can use Standard Arc. However, you will do a bit less damage than the Prismatic version, which I'll explain in a bit with the kit and the rotation here in a second. But first, let's get into the weapons for the build. The current version of this is centered around the Bittersweet Heavy Grenade Launcher. I say current because for Revenant, it is the undisputed best choice. However, in Heresy, this could be switched to something else depending on what artifact mods we get, plus the sandbox buffs that Bungie is doing as well. But for the time being, it's going to be Bittersweet, and here's why. Bittersweet allows you to take advantage of several of the artifact mods we currently have at our disposal. The main 3 that I'm referring to are going to be Concussive Reload, which most of you probably know what it does, but when you hit an enemy with a GL, you will weaken them currently in this season with this artifact mod, and additionally, if you have the Tonic on, it also reloads your stowed weapons, so it's a 2-for-1 with GLs there. Then we have Conductive Cosmic Crystals, which state your arc abilities, void abilities, and weapons with the Dark Ether Reaper Origin trait, which is Bittersweet, by the way, do bonus damage to targets that are affected by a stasis debuff, and then the boost increases the bonus damage to combatants affected with said debuff. So you take those, and you're getting extra damage off of that. And finally, we have Arc Compounding, which states Arc sources deal increased damage to blind targets, and Bittersweet is Arc. On top of that, Bittersweet also is just a fantastic weapon overall, mainly with the Envious Arsenal perk that was introduced in this episode. Dealing damage with both other weapons before readying this weapon refills it from reserves. So even if you don't have the Concussive Reload perk anymore because it goes away with Heresy, you can still utilize Envious Arsenal to reload your weapons for you. And guess what? This is not the last time we're going to be seeing this perk. Also, real quick, people ask me all the time, what is my role for Bittersweet? So here it is. It is Hard Launch, Spike Grenades, Envious Arsenal, and Bait and Switch. So we have Bittersweet covered. Now, the other 2 weapons for this build are going to be the following. In the kinetic slot, you have 2 choices. Number 1 is going to be the more common of the 2, which is going to be Lost Signal. This is a aerial denial GL that's similar to Witherhoard, where you just spray it on an enemy and it does damage over time, but it still does the same concept that we need, which is affecting an enemy with our GL and then weakening them / reloading our weapons, as well as applying a hit because we're going to be utilizing Bait and Switch. Now, Lost Signal is great, but there is one more option that you can do that technically is a little bit better for certain situations, and that weapon's going to be Liturgy. Now, Liturgy is not as easy to get because it's not craftable like Lost Signal is, but it does do the job very well. This can roll Envious Arsenal, similar to Bait and Switch, which is great. You don't need to wait for auto-reloading or anything like that. And then the other perk is really helpful, and that is Chill Clip. So, when you hit an enemy with this weapon, not only will it weaken them, not only will it reload other weapons, but it also apply the Chill Clip Stasis debuff, which means anything that gives us bonus damage through a Stasis debuff, like fragments such as Facet of Courage, we can utilize this to our advantage to do even more damage. Our last weapon we're going to talk about in the energy slot is not something that I ever thought I would use, especially for a damage build. That's going to be Exderis. Now, this weapon does a couple of things. It can make you amplified. It also can get an increased rate of fire when it's enraged after you do damage or take damage. But the one single main thing that this is utilized for is it can blind targets, and it works on bosses, which previously I thought nothing blind-related would work on bosses, but here we are. So Exderis, when you shoot an enemy twice in a row with this weapon, will create a moth, which will then blind said boss. And because you blinded it, you can now use Arc Compounding for the artifacts that I just mentioned to do increased bonus damage with all of your weapons. So our weapon's doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. All three of our weapons can weaken a target. Two of them have Envious Arsenal, so they can just auto-reload themselves just by rotating through your weapons that you're going to do anyway for Bait and Switch. One of them blinds the boss, so you can do even more bonus damage through your artifact system. And then lastly, Bittersweet takes advantage of all of it. You get bonus damage from Arc Compounding, you get bonus damage from Conductive Cosmic Crystal, you get bonus damage from Sanguine, from Well of Radiance. It's actually crazy. Now, believe it or not, there are two more ways we can get bonus damage for this build, but that's going to involve talking about the kit, so let's do that now. So we're going to start on Well of Radiance, and for the build, you have free reign to do whatever you want. You can do whatever aspects you want, you can do whatever fragments you want. If you want to go into like a Resto build or an Ignition build, that's totally fine. The only thing you must have is Well of Radiance, because you're going to pop this super immediately as the damage phase is starting, and then you're going to switch flavors. That other flavor is going to be Prismatic Arc Warlock, or regular Arc if you don't have Prismatic unlocked, although you will do less damage. So, you go to Prismatic Arc Warlock, and you stay on this super because, again, Sanguine depends on what your current super is. So after popping Well, you go to Prismatic Arc. Now, Sanguine is going to give you that 4x weapon surge to your Arc weapons. Then, you're going to utilize your Fragment system to give you even more damage. So we have 6 fragments here, but this first one is going to be the #1 absolutely undisputed fragment that you must have for this build. And that's going to be Facet of Courage. Your Arc, Solar, and Void abilities deal increased damage to targets afflicted with Darkness debuffs. We'll get to the Darkness debuffs in a second, but the main focus here is bonus damage. And you might be thinking, well, Sneak, what abilities? You're just shooting your weapons, right? That's correct. This is where it gets stupid. Once you pop Well of Radiance, your weapons now become ability-based. So when they do damage to a boss, you're doing ability damage. You probably see where this is going. So you pop Well, you switch to Prismatic, you have Facet of Courage on, and now all of your weapons are dealing bonus damage as if they are an ability. For the rest of the fragments, #2 is Facet of Dawn. It's pretty simple. You throw your melee, you get Radiant. So if your well happen to run out and the damage phase is still going, you throw your melee at the boss, boom, you become Radiant, and you get a 20% damage buff. Or at least it'll be 20% in Heresy. Next up is Facet of Command. Anytime that you freeze or suppress a target, it'll reload your weapons for you, one time on a 12-second cooldown, I believe. So this can come in handy for when you're in your Pris portion of your damage phase, and you popped Prismatic, or you threw something that furrows the boss, you can get a free reload off of that. This is helpful in situations where, let's say, you're pumping the boss with your Bittersweet, and then this activates. So, without having to actually go back to your other 2 weapons, you can fire like 14 shots of Bittersweet consecutively before going back to your other stuff. #4 is going to be Facet of Purpose. I think this actually will be more helpful when Heresy arrives, when they implement all the bolt charge stuff and change how Amplified works. This might give you a way to have a bolt charge active while you're doing damage, so that would be another layer of extra damage on a boss too, so I just put this in as a recommendation. #5 is the standard Facet of Protection. Simple if you're surrounded, you are more resistant to incoming damage. Pretty straightforward. And lastly, we have Facet of Ruin for when you shatter a boss or an ignition goes off, it helps with radius and some extra damage on shattering. Now, technically, your aspects and abilities don't matter because when you switch from wild to prismatic, you don't have any, but for the sake of argument, just so you know, what I have is Helion in my aspects, and then Lightning Surge, but you can swap this for Bleak Watcher or Devour if you want. So, for the abilities, if you happen to get Prismatic and pop them, you have Phoenix Dive. When you activate Phoenix Dive, you get Helion, which will then target the boss and do some damage, maybe some additions. And then for my melee and grenade, I have Arcane Needle and Cold Snap because they're both Darkness debuffs. I hit the enemy, then Facet of Courage can proc for bonus damage. Now, as for the rotation, I know that a lot of people out there just hate weapon swapping DPS, but trust me when I say this, this is the easiest, the most basic cookie cutter rotator stuff you will ever do for a damage rotation. So all you gotta do, as I mentioned, you pop well, then you switch to Prismatic Arc or regular Arc, whatever you have, and then you do the following. You fire your Lost Signal or Liturgy one time, then you fire Exderis 2 times to spawn that Blinding Moth to give you Arc Compounding, and then you switch to Bittersweet and fire off either 1 mag or 2 mags if your Facet of Command activates. Then you just repeat that rotation over and over. 1 kinetic shot, 2 energy shots, then a full mag of Bittersweet. Rinse, repeat until the boss is dead. It is very, very simple. The only time you would ever have to worry about anything else during that damage phase is when something has expired or you've gotten your prismatic meter and you want to pop it for that additional 5% extra damage and getting your abilities back. But other than that, it's a very simple rotation to stick to. And as you've been seeing throughout the entire video, the damage that this pumps out is absolutely ridiculous, to the point where you can compete with other classes when they have damage supers to their advantage, like Thunder Crash, like Celestial Nighthawk Golden Gun, like Twilight Axes. It's crazy. Like, it's just crazy. Now onto the mods. I already covered the artifact mods, so we're just going to go straight into armor. First up, we have Helmet. Here we have the standard Heavy Ammo Finder. We have 1 copy of Radiant Light to give somebody an armor charge when we pop our super in case they don't have their own surges yet. And then we have 1 copy of Arc Siphon to build up through our Exderis, so we can have some armor charges of our own if we need it for our special finisher mod that's in our class item. So let's say you have a ton of Exderis ammo, but you don't have a lot of Lost Signal or Liturgy ammo. You utilize Exderis to make some orbs, then to use a special Finny on an enemy and get some green for your kinetic slot. For our gloves, we have 1 copy of Arc Dexterity and 1 copy of Arc Loader. This is for Exderis and Bittersweet. I think it's pretty straightforward what they're here for. Moving on to the chest, we have 1 copy of Arc Resist and Void Resist, and then lastly, I have 1 copy of Arc Reserves just to get extra ammo out of our Bittersweet. But if you do an activity where you're like massively underleveled, you can just put 3 Resist here and put a Solar instead of the Arc Reserve. Now for our boots, you have some choices that I alluded to earlier. Currently, I have 2 copies of Arc Weapon Surge and 1 copy of Stasis Weapon Surge. This is only specifically in the event that you're doing a long damage phase to the point where Sanguine's 30 seconds have ran out and now you need to actually depend on your actual weapon surges. Otherwise, I would put in mods like Recuperation, like Better Already, like Absolution into these slots instead. And the reason why Stasis Weapon Surge is here right here is because when you do have Sanguine and you have 4x on your arc weapons, you can utilize this one single mod to give a little bit extra damage to your Liturgy, or, well, I mean, Lost Signal really doesn't do that much damage, so mostly to Liturgy. And lastly, the class item, we already talked about Special Finny. Then we have Powerful Attraction, just to scoop up any orbs around you if you happen to do a Phoenix Dive. And then finally, Time Dilation to extend the timer on your armor charges for that situation that I mentioned with long damage phases and your boots and your surges. And hey, look at the bright side. Some people will discover this build for the first time and have some fun for a couple of weeks. And in Heresy, while we won't have the current artifact mods anymore and the build will suffer a little bit in terms of damage, you could still utilize this build in the future. You would just have to replace Exderis with something else because you won't have blinding anymore, but it will still be a solid build overall. And that is all for the build. As always, I will have a dim link down in the description below for anyone that wants to try it out on their own. Also, once again, thanks to anybody that has or will support the Game to Give fundraiser with the link below in the description as well. If you did enjoy the video, please consider subscribing today. It does help the channel grow and is much appreciated. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can leave a like and or a comment below as well. If you don't want to leave as a comment, you can leave Sanguine as the comment. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.